Hello, everybody. Let's see when this works. Yeah, this works. Hello, everybody. Today we have two very special guests here on the channel. We have Professor Boje, David, and Professor Rosile, Rosile. Thank you for being on my channel. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Of course, we know each other quite well, so we'll not make it a formal interview, but keep it quite informal. I suggest we start with you present basically who you are, where you're from, for people who don't know you, and then we go from there into management science. Grace-Ann, do you want to start?
Sure. I want to preface my remarks. I forget sometimes when we do presentations together that not everybody realizes we're married. So that's why I say if we disagree, it's legal. It's all right. So David is very closely tied to my career development. Well, I'll start at the beginning. I was an English major as an undergraduate student, and then I got into the business school because I wondered, why is it that people who work together and seem to have the same goals often don't get along? And I wanted to study management to see how can people have an experience at work that's as pleasurable as when they're on vacation. Well, maybe your vacations aren't that pleasurable, but theoretically, I thought, why should we just be happy on 2 weeks of vacation? Why can't we enjoy work also? And I felt like my first summer from college, my first job, I thought it was the most fun. I worked in a hospital, and I was like a ward secretary, and I got to go to all different departments, and I kept track of things, and you know, and there was all the negative side too, but I just thought it was so much fun. But I thought most people start out like that, thinking that work is fun, and then somehow they lose that enthusiasm. So that's one of the questions I was interested in. What happens, and why do we lose our enthusiasm that we had when we started out? And so when I went to college, though, I was an English major, and after college, I got into hospital administration. I had uncles who were doctors and aunts who were nurses, not the reverse, but I noticed that in healthcare, the doctors and the nurses didn't get along so well. And it was almost like this rivalry and feud between them, who was in charge and who should make decisions, things like, I don't know, just lots of friction.
Yeah.
So I went from a school of public health and a master's in hospital administration into a business administration program to study behavior in organizations. And my focus was cross disciplines, cross professions, and how can people, I ended up doing my dissertation on knowledge transfer. How can people make better use of research and knowledge in their work? And so years later, I was just teaching in organizational behavior, and I met David at a conference. And he had a session on storytelling, and having been an undergraduate English major, I said, wow, I didn't know you could do storytelling in this field. And so I met David. He and his co-author, Bob Dennehy, gave me their book, Managing in the Postmodern World.
Yeah.
I came home from the conference. I read the book in 2 evenings. It was so interesting. And I had been teaching for 10 years, and I had actually lost some of my enthusiasm for my own discipline.
Yeah.
When I read his book, I got excited again. And I said, this is why I went into this field, to look at things like, and that it wasn't even on storytelling. It was just more of a deconstruction of what we're about in organizations. And so, for example, in one chapter, he said, do you remember what you said? Strategic planning is a waste of time.
I'm sure I never said that.
So it was something about, it was sort of deconstructing and looking beneath all the assumptions for all of our usual way of doing business.
Yeah.
And so from there, we started working together. And a couple of years later, we got married. And we've been collaborating ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as part of that collaboration, when we moved to New Mexico, and we got jobs at New Mexico State University. It took me a few years to get a second position for me, but one of the things that I had done was taught their first online org behavior class, which I said was like a contradiction in terms. How can you learn human behavior in organizations by getting on your computer every day?
Yeah.
So I designed a very interactive course. That was more than 10 years ago. Now they require that all these online classes be highly interactive.
Yeah.
After that, someone said, you designed that class. We need a class to teach management to our Native American students. We have a major in tribal management. We want to make our course, our basic organizational behavior class, geared towards those tribal students.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I think this is a bigger task than what people suppose. And so as I got into it, I started to see that a lot of the values of tribal traditions were in conflict with our traditional hierarchical way of doing business.
Yeah.
And so I discovered Navajo Peacemaking, which is a way of resolving conflicts that restores harmony and balance to the community.
Yeah.
And so all of these things I've seen over the years have become more important to management today.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are more like that tribal village of ancient times, where because of the internet and technology, everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
It's the good and the bad, both, that your reputation is out there. Everything you do can be publicized widely.
Yeah.
And we need to not assume that you can cheat someone in business and you'll never see them again.
Yeah.
So my work on adapting management concepts for the tribal context then led me to studying ethics from an Indigenous perspective. And in that situation, it was really interesting. There was a call for grant money to develop a training program to teach business ethics to the tribes. And I said, they should be teaching us.
Yeah.
So I said, before someone makes some ridiculous program like that, I'm going to apply.
Uh-huh.
So that's how, and I said, not only should they be teaching us, I'm not the one to say what their ethics are and what they mean and how we should use them. So I made films and interviewed people so that people could speak for themselves. That was a key for me.
Yeah.
That people should speak for themselves, and we should hear them in their own voices and engage in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have my videos, and in my case, the film preceded the book. After we did the film, there was so much information that people had that wasn't anywhere else. I would go and interview people, and I'd say, well, who should I read? What's out there?
Yeah.
Even the native scholars, they would look very sad, and they go, sorry, there's nothing on this. And I said, excellent. That means we have an opportunity to do this.
Yeah.
And so we had so much material from the films that we came up with the book. So it actually happens to be right here. Tribal business.
Hold it up a little longer. Yeah.
Oh.
Are the movies, the films basically available somewhere, or?
They're free on the internet, and they are on YouTube.
Okay.
And so go to Tribal Wisdom for Business Ethics, and if you find it might be affiliated with New Mexico State University, The funders was the Daniels Foundation that paid for it, and there is a subset of the New Mexico State University website where they are. But if you just go on YouTube and Google Tribal Wisdom for Business Ethics, there are a series of 6 short ones and 1 half-hour video.
Yeah, we'll put the link basically below the video. If you send it to me, then I can put it in the video description.
And you can get into the New Mexico State website, and there are teaching notes to go with all these short videos.
Excellent.
It's all free.
Great. David.
What? You want to introduce me?
Oh, did you want us to do separate, or do what, David?
You as you feel.
Okay, I'm David Bochy, and I've been working with storytelling, writing books, about 27, I think, and about 150 articles for about 35 years. And I was at a conference one day in Pennsylvania. I saw this beautiful woman, and she was getting her lunch at the cafeteria, and I said, whoa. And I stepped right in line, right behind her. And I heard her talking to the lady in front of her saying, well, I'm only going to date vegetarians from now on. So I said, vegetarian? And right then I became a vegetarian. And whatever she picked, I picked, just followed her along. And wow, what a shocking change in my life to become a vegetarian, to hold on to this woman, you know? I had only eaten meat and potatoes. I don't think I had many salads. So it was a big change in my life. And that was the first of many changes that she's, I think every time we sit down and talk, I'm changed by Grace Ann, you know? So I think storytelling can inform strategy. We'll pick up on that topic. When you have a strategy, it's basically a story of the future, and you're preparing in advance to implement that story as your future strategy. Yeah. And when you look back before, you have all kinds of history, and sometimes you want to pull out different pieces of history to reinforce the future you want to bring about. So we've been working with this notion of strategy and storytelling for some time. We are looking now to develop more concepts of storytelling that help with strategy, and it's something that if you want to talk about it, we can talk about that. Talk about anything you want.
Let's go back maybe to what Grace Ann said about that we might need, you know, this tribal wisdom because we are moving into a postmodern world where we are also becoming like tribes where, as you said, everybody knows each other. You have your credentials basically known by everybody. Can you, maybe David, can you develop a little bit on, I think you made in your AMG article the difference between modern organization, postmodern, and then we jump back to Grace, and she has a little bit of time to think on that topic.
Sure. I think one of the key problems today for management and organization is all the climate change, all the global warming, the global heat up, the pollution of the water and the air, the soil, the predictions that we might be coming into some very, very dark times if we don't get our act together.
Yeah.
And to get that act together, you really need that kind of tribal wisdom Grace Ann writes about, because you need to ground in what's going on in nature and what's going on in community. And I think for too long, business strategy and business modeling had been so kind of abstract, just working on their supply chains and their value propositions without really grounding it in what's going on in the world. And I don't mean what's going on in the marketplace. I mean what's going on with nature, the trees, the soil, the rivers, the streams. You know, you talk about, you're in France, aren't you? I hope you're in France.
I'm in Germany right now.
Oh, you're in Germany? Okay, you're in Germany. Well, I was just reading in France that their wines are going to taste differently now. we're getting ready to go to Burgundy, so I got France on my mind.
You,
And the wine's going to taste differently because the climate is changing. And we've been in Germany too, and Germany has got a lot of issues. I think they're kind of advanced in taking this seriously. The businesses in Germany, much more so than the businesses in the United States, and we're kind of lagging behind, and I'm very concerned about that in terms of strategy, business modeling, what we're going to do in the world. So storytelling is a big deal because we have stories about the world, and if we're in denial about climate changing, then we're going to run our business in a very risky operation because we're going to do business as usual when we should be changing in a different direction with our strategy. So that if you're not attuned to what's happening in the environment, you know, when I first started studying management and organization, the environment was other organizations. It was the climate of the firm itself, you know, which is like, do people get along and like each other? And now the environment means nature. The environment means ecology. The environment means, you know, carbon cycles and water cycles. So we're really managing in the Anthropocene, which is a very different epoch. You could call it postmodern. Really, modern management is responsible for creating a lot of the problems we're in now. They didn't mean to do it, you know. But Industrial Revolution, a couple of centuries of it, we've got all of the problems with the ecology. So if we just do business as usual without changing, we're going to be making things worse for our business and everybody else's environment as ecology. So we need to make that green turn. And it's very difficult, I think, for companies to do that. They're so used to kind of washing everything green washing it, spinning it, the story that they're doing something responsible while behaving in a very unresponsible manner. So we're trying to help businesses attain that responsible ecology. We think that that's the big shift that needs to happen, or some really dire consequences are going to happen. I don't need to paint this as gloom and doom, but I think we could have a very positive future if we start preparing for it and making the turns. If we ignore it, we're going to have to make such an abrupt shift that it's going to be like hitting a wall, and I think a lot of businesses are going to fail. Okay, I'm done. You can go back to Grace Ann now.
Thank you. Grace, do you have any comment on postmodern companies, basically, and how people need to be managed there in light of your book on tribal wisdom?
The first thing that I learned from the people I talked to was that the most important thing in tribal communities around here anyway, and I think generally around the world, in these small communities, the most important thing is relationships. And it's maintaining beneficial, harmonious relationships. And so it's a little different from the most important thing is profit. And now you see even economists starting to say profit isn't everything. And now you even start to see triple bottom line isn't really measuring everything. It tends to be biased towards the quantifiable and towards dollars and economics, and less so towards the quality of relationships. So I see there's a more of an interest, and there you see it in the current interest in diversity and inclusion. That we have to evolve our communities in ways that that help us.
Triple bottom line, for viewers that don't know about it, it's got three bottom lines, supposedly: profit, the planet, and people. If you look at triple bottom line, that triangle, they always put profit on the top. You go and look at the models, and it's always on the top. But then they're trying to persuade you, well, they're all important. Well, if they're all important, you wouldn't always have profit on the top, and profit is easier to measure, and planet and people dynamics are harder to measure, so it doesn't get done. So we're really trying to kind of understand that story that says, okay, you have these three bottom lines, but if you only have one bottom line, you're kind of deceiving yourself and you're deceiving the public. And so how to actually create metrics where you can measure your performance in all three areas. You can talk about it, but without implementation, it's very, very difficult.
There's another aspect too that relates to relationship, and that is respect. So it's very important in Indigenous cultures that people are respectful, and that relates to that, because in that respectfulness is how you maintain relationships, and how so even well, one of the ways that tribes do that is through ceremonies. So, you know, if they killed an animal, they would thank the animal in the spirit. And this whole idea of being respectful and politeness. So I think as we see in our political situation around the world these days, lack of politeness and lack of respect, it doesn't serve anybody very well. And it seems to be getting out of hand. And so I think we really need to go back to that Indigenous value that we need to be respectful and polite and have courtesy to maintain these harmonious relationships, even if we disagree, and especially when we disagree.
If I ask you to go ahead. If I ask you to speak about the main challenges in management today, what would you pick?
Well, I know what you would answer, David. Oh, okay. You say, one of the things that we worked on when I started working with the tribal things, and David discovered that he said Indigenous people tell stories differently, and they do things differently. It's a more communal way, and it's less of a telling, and it's more of an invitation to explore some ideas. The way they tell stories, their moral lessons, they usually don't tell you what the meaning is, what you're, they don't give you.
That's one of our puppies. They think there's a mailman.
So out of that, we've studied more about how their way of telling stories and their way of ethics pedagogy is different from ours. It's more about exploring and inviting and opening up rather than telling and a top down. So this whole getting away from the top downness, we discovered was an aspect of leadership also. So we find that we saw in especially historical examples, I mean, centuries ago, archaeologists described cultures that they actually had to go back and re-describe, because in the old days, they imposed our hierarchical views on these studies. In more recent years, they recognized their own bias, and they went back and reanalyzed some of this and said, these societies were much more egalitarian than ours are. And so we looked at that and we saw echoes of that in current views on leadership in tribes. And so we wrote about what we called, it's sort of rooted in Indigenous traditions, and we call it ensemble leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And in studying ensemble leadership, we were led to a colleague of ours who said, I know a group that uses that very successfully.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, where? Let's go study them. And we did. And a group of agricultural workers, kind of interestingly enough, descended from the people those archaeologists studied centuries ago.
Okay.
Haitians, Guatemalans, and Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
And indigenous migrant workers in South Florida, their motto is, we are all leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And they manage themselves that way. And so in studying them, we've learned how they do storytelling differently, as ensemble, as group processes, as much more involving of people.
Yeah.
And an extension of that is when they were faced with modern day slavery, sexual harassment, abuses in the workplace, they approached them the same way. The partnership and give and take on both sides, but the voice of the worker has to be there.
Yep.
They call it worker driven. And we have not seen anywhere in the world such an effective system of standards for humane working conditions, along with effective monitoring and true change. And so they got a presidential award in, I think, 2014 for having virtually eliminated modern day slavery in their region.
Okay.
And others are now starting to mimic them. So very important work that they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that Ensemble Leadership does is you have, like in a jazz thing or one of those TV shows, it's an ensemble of actors. So it's not any one actor acting dominant like Star Trek or Star Wars over everybody else in a military manner.
Yeah.
This is an ensemble that shares together, decides together, works together, more equals. And they can lead in different things, but they really get together on their decisions. So we noticed this ensemble leadership phenomenon, and we wanted to figure out, well, does it change corporate social responsibility? And so when we looked at, and you ask about one of the big changes that is happening, I think corporate social responsibility has been kind of a song and say, oh yeah, we're socially responsible, but then they do the same things.
Yeah.
So
is it what you would call a whatever works narrative? So we
yeah, whatever works. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And congratulations on your dissertation and your professorship and doctorate and everything else that's happening to you. Wonderful. And your wonderful family.
Thanks.
Notice that if corporate social responsibility could be worker driven, instead of CEO driven, or some consultant coming in and trying to legislate some program, if it actually had workers involved in the monitoring and the design of the program, it really runs very differently. You're not trying to go and catch everything going wrong. The workers actually become partners in making corporate responsibility work, corporate social responsibility. And we've seen this in action with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. Immokalee is a city in Florida. So and they're a coalition, not a union. So Coalition of Immokalee Workers. And they actually formed alliances, strategic alliances with consumer groups, with university groups, with faith groups, and they put pressure on corporations to implement like fair food programs, where you could buy your food, in this case it was tomatoes, and really be certified that wasn't happening in a very slave wage theft, sex use, kind of things that are typical in those communities. And corporations began to sign on board, initially because they felt the pressure of the consumer groups and the university student groups and faculty groups. And then they said, oh, okay, we'll try it. What could go wrong? And they found that they actually were saving money because the coalition was handling the wages, the timesheets. They were handling the complaints, any kind of things that needed to be investigated, and like human resources. And so it ended up costing them less money
And there's also a
to
high
do it
turnover.
with the coalition and to have a middleman or a middle consultant. And they had less turnover,
Less
better
turnover.
quality. So all the metrics shot up. And all the people going, well, wait a minute, we're saving money, we're getting a better reputation, we're getting better quality. What, so they like this, and 17 corporations have signed on. These are big corporations, Taco Bell, Subway, McDonald's, Burger King, Walmart, 17 pretty good-sized international corporations. And they're happy with what's going on because it's like a win-win for everybody involved. But it took them over 20 years to sort of get this thing in place and convince the corporations, the growers of these produce, that this was workable. And now that it is workable, the people are coming from Germany and France and England to check it out, and from down under. And we're hopeful that this is going to spread the ensemble leadership and worker driven corporate social responsibility worldwide. That's what we're hoping.
Why don't we make a break now and then second part later on?
Okay. We'll come up with different things.
Yep.